My life as Andrew began to undergo serious changes 6 months ago when my cousin Sarah and my older sister, Hannah, asked me for a small favor. Sarah was not doing well in calculus at the university the three of us were attending while I had already aced the course the prior semester. As a fine arts major, Sarah was annoyed at even having to take a mathematics course, and this may have accounted to her underachieving. When she found out that unless she passed the final, which was that afternoon, she would have to repeat the course, Sarah became frantic. That was when she and Hannah brought me to their dorm room and begged me to take the final for Sarah. At first I laughed at them, saying that if they could make me look like Sarah, I would do it. They looked at one another and then at the skinny 5 feet 10 inches, long-legged figure in front of them. No problem, was their reply. Hannah pushed me into the bathroom, told me to shower and to shave. When I had toweled off, I found that they had left me a pair of satin mint green French cut panties, a black Wonder bra and a pair of opaque white tights. Through the door, Hannah told me to get dressed. The panties were tight but went on the same way my briefs did. I pushed my penis to one side. When I looked down, the image of a lump pushing against the satin made me chuckle. Rolling down the tights and sticking my feet in one at a time was a little more of a challenge. I had seen Hannah do this sometimes, but getting the toe and heel line up was not as simple as it first appeared. The other problem was arranging the seat of the tights. With a series of twists and tugs, I finally had the snug material over my thighs and crotch. When I looked down again, the tights encased my legs and covered up the fine dark hair. My long legs had taken a distinctly feminine appearance. Strangely, I began to feel myself getting excited by this and watched in rapt fascination as a bulge grew beneath my tights. Quickly, I slipped my arms through the straps of the bra and wrestled with the clasp. The snug material pushed the loose flesh of my chest into a tiny bit of cleavage. My erection was starting to throb, and now I felt too embarrassed to leave the bathroom. Why was this making me so excited? I'd never been particularly interested in fashion and usually dressed for comfort and not to make any statement. What was I saying now, dressed halfway like a girl? How could I face my sister and her friend? They'd really think that there was something strange about me if they saw my all too obvious erection. After a few minutes of wrestling with these feelings, Hannah asked if I was having a problem as she stuck her head inside. Red-faced, I looked away from her. With a slight smile on her face, my sister took my hand and brought me into the tiny dorm room. Sarah stood by one of the beds with a pile of clothing cast about, trying to put together an outfit. She seemed to take no notice as Hannah sat me on the edge of the other bed. With a quick hand over my face, she took off my tortoise-shell glasses and began to apply a light foundation, then rose blush to my cheeks. A brush covered my eyelids with soft golds, and honey mustards and black mascara thickened my lashes. Hannah stepped back for a second and then drew in my lips with pale red and glossed them. The scent of the makeup connected with the feel of the tights and bra caused a slow eruption that made me shudder. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Hannah asked softly. I looked away again, totally embarrassed. "Here," she gave me back my glasses, "go inside and clean up. We'll have something for you to put on." Glasses on, I padded into the bathroom again. In the mirror was a soft feminine face, almost cute. When I opened my mouth, so did the image. That was me. For endless seconds I simply stood there in astonishment, and might still be there if Hannah had not called to ask if I was ready. In a minute, I answered and rapidly cleaned away the sticky ooze from inside my panties. This time I shoved my penis between my legs and pulled the panties up as tight as possible. The constriction of the satin material started to excite me again, and I fought against that sense of arousal. When I came out of the bathroom again, Sarah was holding up a pair of jet black jeans and gray silk front blouse with faux pearl buttons. "You'll look great in these." She had me sit on the bed and slip on the jeans. They almost did not get over my thighs, but with some pulling and dragging I got them around my waist. My now slowly expanding member was caught between my legs as I zippered up. There'd be no problem for the moment. Next, Sarah slid the blouse over my arms and buttoned me in. Hannah came out of the closet with a pair of black 2-inch stacked-heeled granny boots. The fit was very tight, but with some squeezing I managed to wangle my heels in and with the slick tights get them on and then laced. My foot now took on a provocative arch and the narrow toe gave my foot an even smaller appearance. When I stood, the heels felt awkward but not dangerous, though my calves protested. A few steps around the room and I felt my hips realigning themselves, and soon I felt confident enough that I was not going to fall over. Looking down, I noticed how the tight jeans were plastered to my legs and how the cuffs gave way to very feminine ankles and feet. Finally, Sarah had me sit again and fitted a short auburn-tinted wig over my brown hair. The bangs tickled my forehead and swept across my now hot cheeks and neck. "Just don't scratch too much," Sarah advised as she took my hand and led me back into the bathroom. Side by side, we did look enough alike that anyone who did not know Sarah very well probably would not notice the difference. A smiling Sarah said to the mirror, "So, you'll do it?" "What?" For a moment I had no idea what she was talking about, and then I remembered what this was all for. "You want me to go out?" I murmured. "No one will know. Trust me." She turned to stare right at me. "Please." My heart beating wildly, I nodded. Was this fear, or excitement? Or both? How could I concentrate on a math exam if I was feeling so aroused? Again, I wondered why I was feeling this way, a way I'd hardly felt when I'd been on dates. Was it really the clothes or me? Then there's just a few finishing touches. Hannah pulled me from the mirror and sat me on the bed. Taking my hands, she began to give me a manicure. Soon my nails were rounded and drying with a pale rose-red color. Sarah draped her favorite bracelets over my right wrist and then frowned at my ears. "Too bad they're not pierced." Then she turned and rummaged through the top drawer of her dresser. From an old box she fished out a pair of white moonstone earrings. "Don't worry," Sarah cooed as she pushed aside the hair from my ear. "These are only clip-ons." She attached them to my ears and the weight on my lobes was at first disconcerting. "Shake your head," Hannah directed. As I did so, the hair fell back into place and the earrings knocked lightly against my head. When the earrings stopped moving, the sense of their weight had lessened, but there was a persistent sense of pressure on my lobes. Sarah looked out the window. "Time to go." She sprayed my neck with her favorite perfume and smiled. By now, Hannah was at the door. She had a black patent leather backpack and gave me a small purse with Sarah's ID and a thin strapped watch. As she gave me these items, she was leading me out the door and into the hallway. I was fumbling with the strap of the pack, trying to get it over my shoulder as we sped down the corridor out of the dorm and to the lecture halls. When I had finally got the pack in place, it dawned on me that I was outside. Dressed like a woman. No one took any notice, except two guys who kept staring at me. When I mentioned this to Hannah, she said, "You do have a cute rear that any guy would like to get near." I'm almost jealous. She smiled and squeezed my arm as we kept walking. The awkwardness of the heels gave way to a pinching of my toes by the time we reached the lecture hall. "Good luck," Hannah kissed me lightly on the cheek. "We'll be here to pick you up in a couple of hours." I nodded and pulled open the door and stepped into the hall. A teaching assistant gave my ID a quick look and gave me a seat number and a blue book. Within minutes the exam was underway and I had a hard time focusing on the test as a range of feelings and emotions swirled within me. Taking a deep breath, I applied myself to the material and then the test was over. The TA picked up the test and booklets and I shuffled out of the hall. My feet and ears hurt and the bra straps were staring to rub into my shoulders. Outside the hall I looked for Hannah and saw no one that I knew. Panic hit me and then I took a deep breath. My tiny cleavage heaved as I put my head down and decided to walk as fast as I could back to the dorm and safety. Heels clicked loudly in my ears as I headed for the exit to the hall. The painted fingernails on the doorknob pushed my anxiety level higher. There were more people on the campus now than earlier as finals were ending and evening beginning to cloak the landscape. The last bright beams of sunlight cast a long shadow over my shoulder as I scurried along. The exaggerated legs and my swaying hair around my shoulders was yet another reminder of the image I was projecting. All I wanted was to get back into the dorm and into my own clothes. I was so intent on getting back that I didn't pay any attention to the voice behind me. When a hand touched my shoulder, I thought I would have a heart attack. Someone had found out and I was going to be exposed and expelled. My life was over. I turned but kept my face down, too embarrassed to look up. "Sorry," the low voice spoke. "I didn't mean to startle you. But you left this in the hall." A hand proffered the black patent leather backpack. "Thanks," I said as softly as I possibly could and reached out for the backpack. "What did you think of the exam?" A pair of scuffed white Nikes caught my eyes. Why was this guy talking to me? Why couldn't he just leave me alone? Not bad. I struggled to keep the anxiety that was ripping through my breast out of my voice. Swinging the backpack in one hand, I started to walk away. "What did you get for number 16? He was walking alongside me. My mind was blank and I stopped moving. 16 was all I could manage. Yeah, he stopped too and I sensed his body all too close to mine. The guy was at least a head taller than me, even with these heels. If he knew I was a guy, he'd kill me. How was I going to escape this ordeal? The one about the orbits. He paused and I could see his head shaking in the shadow on the ground. For some reason I froze on that one. I did the rest and then went back, but I'm not sure I did it right. "What did you do?" I pushed up at my glasses. The sweat had caused them to slip along my dainty nose. The problem on the exam came into focus and I softly started to explain the steps I'd taken to solve it. Lost in the process, I suddenly realized that I was looking this guy right in the face. He had a buzz cut and the dark fuzz glistened against the side of his white scalp. From his profile, one gray eye was staring at me, and that's when I fell silent. "Sorry," he looked away. "I didn't mean to stare, just that I don't remember seeing you around before." I swallowed and fear literally vibrated through me. He'd seen my Adam's apple bob up and down. He had to. I'd felt it move 2 miles in my throat. But he was still only looking at my face. "New do," I offered, shaking the bangs on my forehead. He smiled and cocked his head to one side. I swung up the backpack and zipped one strap over my right arm. He reached out and held the other strap for me. "Thanks." I quivered as my shoulder brushed against his hand. What was going on? This was a guy, and I was a guy. Only I didn't look very much like a guy, and I wasn't sure I was feeling much like one either. Okay. He was looking at me again. "Look," I started, "I really have to go. 'Nother final tomorrow." I took a step away and thankfully he didn't follow. "Thanks for the bag." Now turned around, I tried to go as fast as I could without appearing to run. I'd made it, only I hadn't, because a second later he was pacing with me. "What did you have tomorrow?" I could almost feel his thigh rubbing against mine. "Medieval philosophy." That was true, but I wouldn't be taking it as Sarah. "Gallagher?" The professor's name. Yeah, almost against my will I turned to look sideways at him. "Did it last semester?" He's big on Aquinas. He stopped in mid-stride and I did too. "Hey, you know I've still got notes from the class and I did ace the final. Could you use some help?" She sure could. I looked around at the new voice, Hannah. "Andy's too lazy to study alone." From the relief I'd first felt at seeing Hannah and imagining that this was all over to bewilderment at her calling me by a girl's name and suggesting that I needed someone to study with took all of 2 seconds. Andy'd like some company tonight. After all, Sarah and I are going out and she'd be all alone. She's a little shy, don't you think? He didn't say anything for a moment. If it's all right with you? He was staring at me with those gray eyes again. What did he see? How did I look? Why did I care? I looked over at Hannah, who was grinning from ear to ear. She nodded her head and I whispered, "Okay." Hannah told him which dorm building we were in and what time to stop over. "See you later tonight, Andy. Oh, by the way, my name's Andrew." He smiled and before I could react he'd kissed me on the cheek. The flesh burned and my stomach dropped below ground level. I could barely distinguish my legs as Hannah and I walked away. My sister had just set me up with a date, with another guy who had my own name. Emotions ran and fled as they recognized one another and I was lost in a maze of doubt and exciting fear. Back in the privacy of the dorm room, from some reason I began to cry. Hannah sat me on the bed and placing her arms around my shoulders gently rocked me. When I'd finished, she held onto me and stroked my arms. "How could you do that to me?" I finally croaked. "You mean you don't want to study with Andrew tonight?" "I mean set me up." "Come on, Hannah, he's bound to find out that I'm a guy and then I'll really be in for it." I gently pushed away her embrace. "You don't look like a guy just now." "I know what I look like." "No, you don't." What Andrew saw outside was an attractive, even sexy young co-ed. "I was serious this morning about your rear, in these jeans and walking the way you did in these shoes. You're like a guy magnet. I'm just surprised that more of them didn't try to talk to you." She brushed at my bangs. Smiling, she held my cheeks. "You were never very impressive as my kid brother, but as my younger sister you're almost perfect." "But that's just it, Hannah, I'm not your sister." I stood up and all the emotions swirled around me again. "You can be if you want to be." Hannah looked up from the bed. "How about this?" She paused and cast her eyes to the ceiling. "Let's get you cleaned up and into a dress." She held up one hand as I started to protest. "We'll take some Polaroids. If you don't think that you can look like my sister, then you don't have be here tonight." You'd think a guy had never been stood up before. "No, I can't do this, Hannah." "And why not?" "'Cause you're a guy." "Then explain what happened this morning before you put on the jeans." My face exploded into reams of red. How could I explain that? "I'm just afraid." I turned away from her and saw in the distant reflection of the bathroom mirror that some of my makeup hadn't fared very well under my tears. "What are you sacred of?" "That you might like it?" "That someone find you attractive and want to be with you?" "That you can really look sexy?" I started to cry again quietly as Hannah spoke as she verbalized what I couldn't. My shoulders hunched over as the tears added further damage to my makeup. Then Hannah was holding me again. After I'd stopped, she peeled the backpack from me and guided me into the bathroom. "Take a long hot shower and then we'll talk." Nodding, I shucked off the wig and then all the accessories. Balancing on one leg, I unlaced my shoes. The relief in my toes was matched by the pain in my calves as I stood flat-footed again. The jeans were as much of struggle getting out of as they were getting into, and when they were finally around my ankles, my penis strained to pop out from between my legs, though the tights still held me. I flexed my arms and undid the top 3 rear buttons of the blouse and pulled it over my head. Sitting on the toilet, I undid the bra and rolled down the tights. At last I stood and peeled away the panties. Matted pubic hairs caught at my penis, a reminder of the excitement of the morning. The shower water began to steam as I played with the knobs. A look in the mirror now showed a disjointed image. From my neck to my forehead, my face was that of teary-eyed young co-ed, just as Hannah had said. Below were the points of my collarbone, and when I took a deep breath you could count my ribs. There was a fine coating of black hair and a deep nest beneath my armpits. David Bowie's classic echoed in my mind, "Can't tell if you're a boy or a girl." I tried to let the water wash away the intense feelings that had a frightening sense of immediacy. What was going to happen? Why did I have to choose? Why couldn't everyone just leave me alone? After what seemed like hours, I toweled off and found that my wish had come true. The room was empty. Relieved, I lay on the bed and dozed off. No Freudian dreams of hot dogs chasing donuts through tunnels bothered me, and when I woke I was pleased to find that I was still granted solitude. I went looking for the clothes I'd worn earlier in the day. As I shuffled through the cramped room, I kept seeing articles of Hannah's or Sarah's, but none of my clothing. One item that kept intruding on my mind was a white leather bustier and skirt set. Every time I glanced around me I caught sight of this until finally I decided to look right at it. When I did, I was holding on to it before I'd known what I was doing. The fragrance of the leather filled my mind and I closed my eyes. Supple material begged to taste my flesh, and within moments I had unzipped the skirt and stepped into it. The leather was lined, but the skirt clung to my bare skin as I pulled close the zipper. From just above my knee to just below my navel the skirt sang out. The lining titillated the tip of my penis. When I moved my leg, the leather outlined a shapely thigh. The bare skin of my leg looked awkward, so I rummaged in Hannah's bureau for a pair of pantyhose. The sheer black nylons I found were soon rolled into tiny donuts and sat down as I stepped into one and smoothed the material up over one calf and knee and then the other. I had to stand to pull the pantyhose over my slender thighs and seat the panty over my groin. By now I was very excited and saw that I was starting to ooze. Wrapping a tissue over the head of my penis, I nestled into the pantyhose. When I looked down now at my legs, the black covered the fine hair on my legs and added a certain mystery, but something was still missing. Shoes. The bottom of the girls' closets were littered with various styles and colors, but once I saw the black vinyl knee-high boots I knew they went with the skirt. The boots were lined like the skirt, and with the addition of the pantyhose my legs slid into them as if they'd made just for me. Pulling up the zippers, I stood on the 3-inch stacked heels and half-inch platforms. My calves were outlined in vinyl and gave me a more sensual appeal. With my hips pushed out and my rear thrust upwards, I tired to get a look at my rear, but all I could do was turn myself around. On the last revolution, I stopped and stared at the bustier. Feeling foolish, I grappled with the garment until I had it around my torso. The tight leather again gave me a tiny bit of cleavage and revealed my navel. Tussling with the loose flesh of my chest, I tried to look more presentable and stopped dead. Presentable as a girl! I looked down at my body, now swaddled in white leather skirt and bustier and boots. Aside from the hair beneath my armpits, I looked like a girl, and with that thought I began to get excited again as I had in the morning. I felt sexy, almost wanton. Laying on the bed, I struggled with what I was feeling and with how I looked. When I crossed one booted leg over the other, the sight caused me to be aroused even further. For an instant I wondered if Andrew, too, would find this as erotic. That stray thought panicked me. I was thinking about how a guy might find me attractive as a girl. What was happening to me?